For everybody that doesn't know, Tyler, give us, a little bit of background about you. How did you get started in tech? Obviously, you've done a lot of what I would call groundbreaking things. And so give everybody like a brief background about you, where you come from, and how you got started.
Yeah, no. So hi, I'm Tyler. Yeah, I, I'm originally from Seattle, born and raised in Seattle, Washington. And I kind of grew up in an entrepreneurial family. When I would sit down and learn things from my dad, instead of talking about like family values and principles, it was more like, hey, here's the difference between credit card debt and this, or just weird business like principles and like foundational learnings is are things that I would just pick up kind of as life lessons from him, because of his entrepreneurial background. My dad started a tech company back in the early 90s and actually took it all the way to IPO back in like the dot-com boom. And so I kind of grew around that as like a 13, 14-year-old kid, kind of saw what he was doing. And I just kind of always decided in my head, like, I'm just going to start my own thing. I'm just going to build my own thing. Like, I did go to college and I got a degree, but even when I was at school, I was just like, I'm never going to use this. I'm here to get an education, not so much like a degree. I'm just here to like learn things like the soft skills, the hard skills, like everything that goes into an education, and then take that and go do my own thing. It was never like learn, sit down, do these classes, go through the whole, system. And then at the end of my college career, go and apply to 20 jobs and go land one for 45K out of college and just like work up the corporate ladder. Like, I just never ever thought that way. So I don't know, just been ingrained in me since I was young, and specifically technology entrepreneurship too, like more so like, I'm not starting like a ton of services companies or even like product companies. It's more so focused on tech. And I know one of my most famous ones was DevMountain, which is actually not tech. We're teaching tech, but we didn't build
Yeah.
tech per se. But I was around that whole environment, that technology ecosystem, and always have been. So yeah, that's who I am. I'm a tech entrepreneur. Yeah.
So what was kind of the, like, when you went from, so, where did you make the transition from? You said you did go to college. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Yep.
I want to dive in on that a little later, but where was the transition from like college into, what was your first venture that you did? Was it, because DevMountain wasn't your first, right?
No, it was not. No, my very, very first tech entrepreneurship venture was actually in college. Before that, I did dumb little things when I was in high school. I really, really like art. I love being creative. And as a kid, I loved drawing. Even up until like high school, I was the kid in class that was always doodling on the chalkboards or like the whiteboards in class, and always writing on my notes and doing crazy like doodle art. But I quickly realized that art wasn't really going to take me anywhere. Like, I couldn't like draw art and then sell it for $1 million unless I'm like Picasso or someone super super
Yeah.
popular. All right. But
Or unless
in
it's an
high school,
NFT now.
yeah, or an NFT. There we go. Yeah, with nowadays with all the crypto stuff. Yeah, but no, I realized, okay, I can't really do much with art. But even in high school, I was always like slapping my art on T-shirt and going selling them to local skate shops or whatever it was. Just trying to get my brand out there. And I'd sell like $200 in shirts, and I thought I was filthy rich when I was 16 years old, and stuff like that. But my very first tech venture was in college. I started dumb enough, being a college kid. I started a dating application. Actually, it was kind of like the Tinder before Tinder was. This was back in like 2010, right when kind of iOS apps were hitting the scene. We built a mobile, yeah, we built a mobile application really, really quick, and kind of got out there really quickly, scaled it to a couple 100,000 users in kind of the local Utah market. And then we were eventually bought by a competitor of ours who was backed by Microsoft Ventures. So they were flush with cash, and they basically said build or buy. And instead of building their own mobile application when it was kind of maybe more complex than it is today, they were like, let's just buy this company. And they bought my company, and that was like a 3-year thing for me. And that was my kind of my first thing. So it was awesome. That was to get my toes wet a little bit.
What was that called?
It was called Matchmate. Matchmate. And the whole concept around it was like, you would get your friends on the app and then they would match make you. So like the whole, back when Facebook like first released their Facebook login, and you could like log into things with Facebook. And it was like kind of
Yeah.
almost the wild, wild west, because when you logged in with Facebook back in the day, it was like super unsecure. Like everybody was getting your email address, everybody was getting your profile picture.
Hmm.
Like back in the day when you connected to Facebook, what our app would do is we could actually get the email addresses and profile pictures of people's friends. So like if you were a friend with someone on Facebook, if you logged in with in with Facebook, I could get all of your social circles on my app. Like, and so it was crazy for this dating landscape of, if one person signs up, I essentially get 1,000 more people on my platform, and then I can talk to them, communicate with them via their email address or their Facebook account, sending them Facebook messages. And we were just connecting people left and right. And it was super, super viral. Like we had a
Wow.
crazy virality coefficient with that app. And that's why it scaled so quickly. It was like for every one user, they were bringing like 7 users back to the platform, which is
Jeez.
absolutely unheard of. A viral coefficient of 1 is awesome. For every one user, if you bring one other user, that's a great equation. But if you can bring 7 for every one user that came on board, it was absolutely insane. But that's because, again, this was very early days, and again, before even Tinder existed, that's what we were doing.
You've always had that hustle. I love how you went from like just selling shirts to out of nowhere just creating like this really big dating app. And to your point, it's super crazy even more how far like privacy and like security has come. And
Oh yeah.
that's such a fun story. That's awesome.
Oh
The
yeah. I
details
mean,
on that.
some of the guerrilla marketing tactics for that first app were so bad. Like we would go into like university bathrooms, both male and female. We'd go in there and write with lipstick our URL, our domain, like go check out matchmate.com, and like with lipstick on the bathroom mirrors on every bathroom in every building on every campus within 60 miles of where we live. We just like went and plastered that with lipstick. And, we got in trouble a couple of times, but just stuff like that, yeah, I would never do that today or do some of the stuff that I've done previously
That's
in my
awesome.
career for sure.
Do you mind me asking, like, so you sold it? Was that exit like? I mean, that's pretty crazy to have your first, really your first go work
Oh,
out
it
like that.
was
So was
very
that?
small though. It was very
That's what I was
small
gonna
though,
say. It
but yeah,
wasn't
we
big
did
enough that
sell
you
it.
were like, yeah. So it wasn't big enough that you're like, I'm a the greatest person ever to be born. But it was
I
enough to
thought I
be like,
was.
man, this is
I
working.
mean,
Yeah.
so when I started that company, I was 20, and when I sold that company, I was 23. 23. So and I thought I was so cool, but literally, if you actually took the hours and time and effort that I put into that company versus how much I got back from that company, because I really didn't ever pay myself that much. It really was not a revenue producing machine. It was more like of a user acquisition play. And,
Hmm.
then people were interested in acquiring us because we had the application and the technology that we had built over 2 or 3 years. And on top of that, we had a ton of users that came along with that whole package. And so we just came to a deal basically almost on a whim, where this competitor of ours was like, hey, we kind of want to do what you're doing. Would you guys be interested in selling? We're like, yeah, sure. And it was just like, okay. And it was a very short deal and a very small deal. But to us, it was like, you know what, let's just do it. And we did it. Do I regret it? No, because it was kind of a cool experience. And I had technically a win underneath my belt. And so I just did it for the experience. And like I said, if you actually took the hours that I put into that project versus the money I got paid, it was like pennies for every hour of time that I put into that project. So it was not that great of a return at all. So
Well, from that, I'm sure you like learned like a crap ton too, both from starting a company like that to acquiring like all of those users and taking advantage of all those things. How did you apply what you learned to then go like start something like DevMountain?
yeah, so after that dating application, I actually went to work for another startup. So I knew a doctor who was starting a new technology actually in the genetic industry and the genome space. What he was trying to do was trying to create software that when you would go and get your genetic reading done, there's these huge machines called sequencing machines that basically they take a blood sample and they spit out all this data, and it's really really hard to interpret. But what his software did was take these pages and pages and papers and papers of this data and put it into software and interpret what that data actually meant in like a software kind of dashboard landscape. And I went to go work for
Hmm.
him. He was just barely starting out, and I was the first hired employee after the founders at that company. And I learned a ton there. What I learned at that project was more about the fundraising and the financing of the startup, because his
Mm-hmm.
idea was so big and so capital intensive that he was almost always focused on financing the project. He's like, if he'd raise $1 million, like literally the next month he was like out raising another 500,000. Like he was just constantly
Mm-hmm.
always raising financing. And so I was kind of the right hand man to him, the CEO. And so I kind of almost took over CEO esque type responsibilities, where I was jumping on the sales call. I was like a
Mm-hmm.
huge responsible for a lot of the technology and kind of the project management of all of that software application, and kind of being the connect and the customer support, because again, I was the very first. So I learned a ton there. But while I was at that job is actually where, when we started DevMountain, myself and two other co-founders, when we started DevMountain, it was a complete side project. It was never, yeah, we never thought
Really?
it was going to, oh, 100%. We
Wow.
thought, oh, let's just teach people coding in our part time. And for those who don't know what DevMountain is, DevMountain was a coding boot camp, or a coding school, basically, where we taught skills and principles and an education to learn coding and web development really, really quickly in a matter of 12
Mm-hmm.
weeks, rather than like a comparable, software CS degree at like a local university that takes 4 years. So yeah, we started it completely part time. We thought, oh, when we all have our day jobs, let's just teach at from like 6 to 9, 2 times a week, and just like see how it goes. And the
Uh-huh.
very first class we started, it just blew up. I'm like, wow, we really have to pay attention to this. We really have to quit our day jobs and
Yeah.
get on the startup grind
Jeez.
again. So yeah.
Did any of you know how to code before like starting this company either, or were you just like, oh, we should teach coders how to program, and then like, wow, we have a bunch of registrations now? What?
Yeah, so yes. So one of the co-founders, and who we actually later dubbed our CEO, his name was
Mm.
Kalen Sharp. Kalen was a very seasoned developer. He had like 10 plus years in kind of the web application space, and
Mm-hmm.
had worked for a ton of different startups previous to DevMountain. And again, I was connected to him mainly just because we were looking for someone who could kind of own the curriculum aspect of DevMountain, right?
Yeah.
Because it was a school, so we had to build the curriculum from the ground up. And we're like, okay, who's going to own that? And I do have technology chops. Like I've made my own applications before, and I can definitely throw together a website. But as far as calling me like a full stack guy that like a startup
Uh-huh.
can depend on, I would not consider myself that kind of guy. But from my previous experience, always being around technology, I'm very good with computers, and I can get around and hack out an application if needs be. But
Yeah.
Kalen was the man. So he built that curriculum, and on day one, and decided, okay, what are we going to teach? How are we going to teach it? Who's going to teach it? And always iterating on it. Okay, was that good? Did they learn anything?
Mhm.
Okay, no. Okay, let's put this in. Let's try this, and then always updating it too, because technology moves so quickly. Like something we taught,
So quickly. Yeah.
yeah, something we taught 6 months ago could be completely irrelevant, and all the time at DevMountain. So it was crazy to update
Mhm.
and keep that curriculum for sure.
That is the hardest thing about courses just in general. It's like as soon as like 6 months to a year goes by, it's like I feel like a lot of the technologies are deprecated, or like the API like is no longer there, like anti patterns and stuff like that. And so going in and starting a whole program like that is definitely a big undertaking with how fast
Yeah.
technology moves for sure.
And that's definitely what Kalen kind of gravitated towards, and his responsibilities. But also, he's so passionate about education too. And I was, but I had never been in education before. I'd never executed it in the kind of the education space where Kalen, he actually had. He has been, in his past career, he had worked at education startup before, built education software, and so he was just like the perfect fit. When we were looking for someone, when we wanted to
Mhm.
start those classes, it was like, oh, Kalen is the guy. And so me, myself, and Kalen and another guy, we all started it together. So there was three original founders of DevMount.
How did you know that DevMount? Like, what were you seeing at the time when you started that? How did you know that it was a good idea? Was it just something that you were kind of kicking around saying, "Hey, we should try this," or had you seen enough in the market and seen, was that kind of the same timeline as like Y Combinator or Techstars and those kinds of things, or what were you seeing that led you to think, like, man, we could
It
crush
was,
this idea?
yeah, Y Combinator started, I think it was the very first accelerator. And then I think Techstars came on the scene, and they had been operating and been around for a handful of years. I think they started early 2000s, maybe even like, I think Y Combinator, I don't know, the first year, maybe 2009, 2008 or something like that. And we started DevMountain in 2012. But yes, it was kind of that co-working tech accelerator environment that was kind of hot at the time, right? Around 2010, 2011, like I don't know if you guys have heard about like General Assembly and
Yeah.
WeWork and some of these like
Mhm.
what is a space in Chicago called like 1812 or something like that in Chicago? Just these huge co-working spaces that were kind of like the new way to work. It was like, oh, let's just build out these huge spaces like these warehouses and throw people in them and just have open space work environment and just let startups and everybody collaborate and just be there. And that's kind of what also led to kind of our same business model, which was, oh, at these co-working spaces, let's offer education pieces, let's offer lessons and curriculum. And so people come in and learn here as well. And so there was one starting actually in Provo, Utah, and I knew the owners of this new co-working space that they were starting. They're like, "Oh yeah, we want to start lessons," and I was like, "Oh, okay, like I'll help you run lessons out of here. What kind of lessons should we do? Let's do coding. Everybody wants to learn about coding. There's such a deficit of coders or web developers for the
Mhm.
hotbed of Utah, the tech hotbed of Utah. Everybody could use more coders. Okay, let's teach coding. And so then Kalen jumped on board, and the co-working space was involved, and we started our first class. We literally bought like a $9 domain name and just thought, okay, I guess we'll make an application for this. People can apply, and literally within 2 to 3 weeks, we had like 60 applications of people wanting to join the class,
Oh
and we're like,
man.
wow. And so we started a class. I think the very first
Wow.
class had like 20 people that started it and 17 people finished it. So we had like 17 people in that very, very first class. It was a part-time thing. It was like 2 days a week, 2 nights a week. And yeah, we just hit the ground running because we saw the traction to answer your question, Shane.
Yeah, so I have kind of two questions on that. One, what was your first like? Because I know definitely, it's like if you have I've had consumer packaged goods companies, and I know, it's like one thing to get it into a store, but it's a totally different thing when you see some random person that bought that, and you're like, whoa, it actually like sold through, right? So
Yeah.
in that space, like, because I imagine a lot of the people come in and they might learn the skills and and they're not maybe able to apply them. What was your first big like holy like this is working, like this dude came in and didn't know a line of code and then got like a huge job? Was there kind of one that comes to mind where you're like, man, this is
Oh, yeah.
crushing it for our people?
This business model was really rewarding and in that aspect, right, where you could actually see our idea or our model, our business actually impacting the lives of other people and like helping them. It was a small percentage in comparison to the whole world. This was like a world
Mhm.
changing idea, but in our world, it was life and world changing, right? And so it was really, really cool product to see, like a Subway sandwich maker come to our class who was earning $30,000 a year and go 12 weeks later, go through our program, earn 60 to $70,000 out of the gate,
Mhm.
completely change his whole mindset and become this huge, potential earner in his career, and eventually move on. Like I even to this day see people at the gym or at other startups that I'm now investing or helping with that are like, oh yeah, I went to DevMountain. I'm like, oh, that is so awesome. What are you doing? Oh yeah, I've had 6 jobs. I went from Canopy to Domo to Adobe, and now I'm a senior web developer. It's like, wow, that's amazing, man. And now this dude's earning 6 figures and he's like providing for his family. And it's just the most rewarding feeling. Yeah, it's the same thing when I would see my shirts on people from those skate shops. It's the same thing with
Yeah,
Dead
yeah.
Mountain, but just in a more meaningful way. You know what I mean? It was like life changing. It was really cool.
So that was my follow-up actually, because Austin, you were a dev mountain crew. What was your experience
Yeah.
there?
I mean, I guess to kind of even say, like, initially, I would say my perception is very, very similar to yours, Tyler, in the sense, I mean, all growing up, like, I knew I wanted to start something, build something, like, whatever. But as I started going to school, like, I just kind of started just seeing a bunch of people around me. And so I'm in a small town from Idaho, going to school for computer science. And here I am
Mm-hmm.
programming. And unfortunately, I didn't get to meet a lot of people like you in the sense that wanted to go out and build something or start something new, or was like just had like this different view of the world, is really what it comes down to. And I wanted to get out. And so I still wanted to program. I just did not think it was necessary to go through a computer science program to get where I wanted to go. And so I just
Right.
kind of said, screw it. Looked up a ton of different boot camps, and DevMountain by far offered a lot of just had like a really good track record. I don't know, just had tons and tons of good reviews. And then on top of that, they offered housing. And so when I went in there, I was kind of like skeptical, like, I'm just gonna go in and do whatever and like grow myself. But as I walked into like the first day and see, a whole room of web developers like just getting started in their curriculum, and a whole room of designers getting started in theirs, and then this big cohort of just iOS developers, which is what I do, it was like completely like eye-opening and game-changing. Like going in there, everybody was like super excited to really like reach the next level, or really wanted to accomplish something by the end of it, and that was like super
Right.
empowering and super awesome. And so I had an awesome experience. I loved all of the mentors there. I loved all of the students, and really just had a ton of fun. I thought DevMountain was a blast. So it's super cool that you were able to go in and start something like that, and then it's even more exciting that I was able to go in and benefit from it too. And now I would say that I've, because of that, accomplished like a ton and had a bunch of success from it. So
That's awesome, man. That is so awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's so meaningful to hear. You have no idea. And every single person that comes up and tells me those kind of stories and their background, what they're doing now, and how Dev Mountain impacted their life is awesome. I think that's kind of what we looked for. You mentioned, oh, like there was all these people that were like trying to achieve something and were really motivated. I think that was like the number one thing we looked for in students, and why you met the criteria too, is just driven, passionate people that you didn't have to be super book smart, or you didn't have to be super street smart. But if you were willing to just kind of like roll up your sleeves and get your hands on a keyboard and actually learn something and apply it, like that's the
mm-hmm.
kind of mentality we looked for, right? There wasn't this huge screening process in comparison to maybe like a 4-year degree or a college or university, right? It was more so like, hey, are you here to actually work hard and do this? If so, come on in. And that's what created that cool atmosphere all the time. Like, yeah, you could just, it was almost palpable when you could walk into a DevMountain campus and see all these students. And, in the later stage, I'm actually not at DevMountain anymore. I left back in 2018 after we sold it. But, when I was there, it was like when you walked into a DevMountain room and, there's
Mm-hmm.
at the later stages, hundreds of students just walking around a campus and, 5 or 6 classes going on at a time. It was just like, wow, this is such a cool atmosphere, right? It was really cool.
So I have one question on education before, and not to stick on Dev Mountain too long, but with seeing that and seeing that kind of track record, and seeing people like Austin, or seeing the countless people that have gone through it,
Yeah.
did that shape your opinion on like education and college in general? Do you think that that's like, where do you kind of see the future of college or education going? Do you see the other fields picking up maybe more of a Dev Mountain model? Like, I always wonder if it's possible for, instead of maybe a doctor wouldn't be a good example, but like a high,
Yeah.
an attorney, or, some field like that. Do you think that there's other
Yeah.
applications for the model from Dev Mountain? And did you get pretty opinionated about that as you went through it all?
Yeah, like I said, I really wasn't in education before I started DevMountain. I didn't really have an opinion on it, but over time, I grew a very large passion and opinion on it. And I'm not here to talk bad on colleges and universities and those 4-year degree programs or master programs or whatever you have it, but at the same time, I just thought where DevMountain was finding success was more so on the actual skills based side of education, right? Where maybe sometimes colleges or universities are less active and more so like theory and talking about things more so than actually, getting a hand on a keyboard and actually practicing the principles that you're learning. And that was our structure from day one, was like when you'd go to class, you would learn something, but then directly in that same class period, you would literally apply that same exact thing you just learned, like whether it was through student projects or personal projects or team projects or building something or a class curriculum project or whatever it was. It's like, okay, you learned X thing today. Okay, now go and apply X thing. Whereas it takes there's a lot more time in a typical degree program, from where you're learning something to where you're actually applying it or building it or doing it. And I think those kind of skills are where you can see a lot more boot camp type esque, environments where boot camps can be successful. So yeah, I don't know if I would like a doctor to go through a 12-week boot camp and like perform surgery on my heart, but like I told you earlier, we started a new boot camp now, myself and my father and some other people, where we're doing a startup boot camp where we're teaching startup principles, what to do and what not to do when you're in those very early stages of building a startup just because of our past experience and what we've seen and kind of the war stories and being down in the trenches and, as an entrepreneur should. So that's being successful. And we've seen a ton of other boot camps be successful. We see marketing boot camps, sales boot camps, right? Learning these quick, hard-earned skills from people who have been there, done that. I think that's a great way to learn. It's almost like a one-on-one mentorship, but like, in a boot camp curriculum delivered straight to you in a quick kind of almost fire hose, way, rather than like kind of a dripping faucet like some degree programs can be, right? So,
and
anyways.
I think that's a really good transition too, of like founders, having to be in the trenches and making a lot of mistakes. And one big thing that I think a lot of people listening to this podcast, one of the big things that they probably struggle with is getting funding. I think overall, like there's an idea, and at some point, you've got to take it so far by yourself, by bootstrapping or whatever else. But at some point, one of the biggest hurdles is getting in front of people and trying to get funding. And so let's talk about that. I mean, you've been through a ton of different startups, and I bet you've had to get all sorts of funding. But what's some advice you would give around that for those people who are trying to either get angel investments or get VC investments for their product? What are some kind of do's and don't rules?
I think this is a very frequently asked question. Yeah, with any kind of budding entrepreneur that are just starting out, their main focus is always like, how do I raise money? How do I get financing? How do I get funding? And I always tell them the same thing. You got to put yourself and understand how a venture investor actually invests and accepts risk, right? If you're a nobody walking off the street with just an idea that hasn't been validated or nailed, or you haven't done any building or scaling or anything that, to contribute to that idea, and you come and say, and let's say you were an investor and someone comes to you and says, oh, will you invest in my idea if I just have this idea? It's like, no, that's a huge risk for me. I'm not going to throw 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, $1 million at you if you have nothing vetted out and nothing validated, right? So I've always tell entrepreneurs that the more you can validate an idea or a business model, the better chances you have at raising funds or financing. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say I want to sell bananas on the street corner, and I think it's the most coolest idea, right? And the investor's like, no, that is such a dumb idea. But I go and I say, hey, I talked to 2,000 people in my local neighborhood, and 98% of them said they would buy bananas if I started this banana stand on my corner, on the street corner right here. And now will you give me $20,000? Because I can basically promise you, and I have written out checks from those people saying they will pay the second those bananas are available, right? I know that's a dumb idea, but I'm just trying to teach the principle. Like, the more you can vet out something, the more you can validate something, then the better chance you have at raising capital. And there's a reason why later stage capital financings are such huge checks, right? A Series C check is like $50 million, whereas like a pre-seed check is like $50,000, right? And that's because the idea has gone through the validation and the nailing of the business model and the building and scaling of that business model to now basically it's this well-oiled machine where you can say, okay, for every dollar I put into this thing, it's going to give me back $2.50. So that's a great investment for me, right? So if the more you can prove that the investment is amazing for the investor, and I'm not just saying giving him an awesome sales pitch like, oh, this is going to change the world. I'm saying actual cold, hard facts like, I've talked to 2,000 people, or, I have written out checks from these people that say they're ready to buy it the second this thing is available, or whatever the validation is, right? The more you can deliver to the investor that way, the more they're receiving of that idea, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, if you don't mind, can we get even drill in on that even a little bit more? Like, I love the analogy of the banana stand, or whatever it might be. But let's take an app, right? Like, let's say somebody wants to launch a meditation app or a dating app or something right now, and they say, hey, this idea is good. I know it's good, but I don't have, maybe they don't even have $25,000 to go validate the idea, or $10,000 to validate the idea. What would that look like at a really baseline level, something that anybody could do without any seed funding at all?
It doesn't cost any money to talk to people. Go talk to your potential customers. That's what you have to do, right? You have to go interview and pick their minds, right? So if I'm going to start an application that is a meditation app, go talk to people, whether it's within a Facebook group or on Quora or on Reddit or in person or
About
just your
friends and
close
family.
friends and family, your schoolmates, anybody, right? Just like, hey, have you ever used a meditation app before? If so, have you paid for it? If not, okay, why didn't you pay for it? Okay, how much would you pay for something like this? What do you like to see in a meditation app? And then over time, let's say, depending how fast this entrepreneur is going or how motivated he is or he or she is to get this app off the ground, you can do that in a week's time. Like, I hate it when entrepreneurs come up to me and be like, oh, like, I want to start an idea, but I just don't know what to do. Like, dude, just get off your hands and start doing something. Like, you can always make progress to that ultimate goal of starting a company, because I think as time progresses, it actually gets worse for everybody. The older we get, the more responsibilities we take on, the harder it is to actually drop everything if we find an idea that has traction, right? So there's no better time for any entrepreneur than exactly this second to start going and executing on something. And there's so many different ways you can do that are free
What would you
and
say
easy.
if that person was like, hey, that sounds awesome, but I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a people person. I'm a technical, I'm a technical founder. What would you say to that person that thinks they're not a customer facing person?
There's a reason why co-founders exist. There's a reason why you build teams. I think being a solo entrepreneur is really, really bad. I think actually being a 50-50 entrepreneur is really, really bad, because who makes that final say in the end? Like, I like teams of 3. I really do. I don't like teams of 5 or 6 co-founders. I think that's just too much. But I think 3 or 4 people getting in a room, putting their heads together, that have different personalities that complement one another is great. Like, honestly, if that meditation app, the original co-founder was a female web developer, great. Go find yourself another co-founder who complements your skill set. Go find that social, interactive, a strong personality person who's a people-facing person to complement your idea and your business model, right? So that's what I would say. I'd say go find team members.
You've literally nailed everything that we've pushed this entire this entire time. It's like, step 1, don't come to us and tell us you have an idea. Step 1's like, go talk to hundreds of people and validate that the product, or that there's actually a need in the market. And then number 2, build a team, build a strong team, and not just of friends and family, but people who really complement you and can help really level up your overall idea.
Yeah.
I think that's
Just
huge.
one point on that is, from my exit of DevMountain, unlike my very first exit, which was not very fruitful, DevMountain's exit was great, right? There was a great wealth generating event for me, one of the biggest I've ever experienced. And so I've been fortunate enough from that, now being entrepreneurial, being a business guy, I want to go and invest in these other ideas. And so now I'm on the other side of the table, which is really, really cool too. I'm actually putting money, I invest maybe into 2 or 3 deals a year into actual direct deals. And then I'm a participant as a partner in a ton of different VC funds as well. So I've done probably about 8 direct investments into startups, and I've done probably about 25 to 30 indirect investments into startups through a fund. But I know that even myself, if people come to me and they say, oh, I have this idea, and I think it's the dumbest thing ever. But never judge a book by its cover, because then they come out with all this proof and they show me in their slide deck, this is why, this is what we're doing. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we actually can get from step A to step B. And I'm like, wow, when you first sat down, I thought this was the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And now when you're done talking to me 30 minutes later, I actually want to put money into this thing, right? So it happens all the time, but you just have to have the right proof to show the investor, and you can accomplish it.